For almost 70 years, the Queen has been the head of the most famous family in the world. But one day, there will be a changing of the guard. Her son, Prince Charles, is waiting in the wings.
He's certainly the best trained king we're ever going to have. He's been waiting and training for decades.
Since birth, Prince Charles has been preparing for the ultimate role, and with that comes a pressure to choose the perfect bride.
He couldn't really step out with a member of the opposite sex without the press immediately analysing everything about this person.
When you marry into the royal family, you marry into pressure.
Tonight, royal insiders share the secrets of Charles and Camilla's rise to the top. The ups, the downs, and the scandal.
There was such public debate and debate within the hierarchy of the church and the government about whether a divorced man could become king.
Not only had a future king divorced, he then married his mistress.
The secret love that rocked the royal family.
The Camilla affair did huge damage to Prince Charles's standing. They no longer trusted him, and many people didn't want him to be the future monarch.
But have Charles and Camilla finally won the public's affection?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say a few brief words.
It's hard to imagine that when Camilla was the most reviled woman in Britain, that today she is wife of our future king.
Once young lovers, now 50 years later, are they ready to rule together?
Charles was born very simply to be king.
I think he's strong enough and positive enough, with Camilla by his side, to make a very positive, good king.
The story, as will be written in the history books, will be a great love story.
In 21st century Britain, appearances from Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, are a cause of celebration for many. Charles, the longest-serving heir apparent in history, and Camilla, as his future princess consort, has an integral position in the royal family.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Clarence House, and thank you all very much for coming.
But as the royal couple celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary, at the beginning of their relationship, this never seemed like a possibility. Since his birth in 1948, Charles has always been the king in waiting.
This was just after World War II, and in terms of the stability of the country and the stability of the monarchy, the birth was seen as a major event.
It was a moment for huge celebration because it was the securing of the line of succession. It was a boy, he was an heir. Charles was born very simply to be king.
The eldest of 4 siblings, and with the future of the monarchy on his shoulders, Charles had to quickly learn the responsibilities of royal life.
Charles didn't spend a lot of time with his mother in the early years. She went off on tour and left the children at home with nannies and governesses.
He really wanted to do well at everything, didn't want to put a foot wrong. And I think that must have been really challenging.
There's little doubt that his early years and his years at school was a very difficult time for him. He also found that he was a centre of so much attention that made him realise that in his particular position there would always be fascination in everything he did.
As the future king grew older, questions began to be asked of who would one day be his queen.
There was acute interest in his private life from the start, really. And of course, that forensic press scrutiny was something that continued through the years.
Any woman that happened to be on his arm was already listed as the future wife and a future queen. It does bring a lot of pressure.
He was a fit guy, you know, he was very intelligent, the girls seemed to like him, but he was in a way weighed down by all of these worries of expectations of what was expected not only of him as heir to the throne, but of his future bride.
In the early 70s, Charles would make an introduction that would change the course of royal history.
Camilla came from a very high society background. She had aristocratic links back through her family, and she had a very kind of privileged high society upbringing.
Camilla was engaged to Andrew Parker Bowles. They were going to get married, and then it didn't happen. It was a sort of on-off relationship, and while it was off, Camilla sort of befriended Charles.
They clicked immediately. There was a chemistry between the two of them, and really, I think probably Charles fell in love with Camilla from the moment that he met her. In many ways, she did tick the right boxes for a future consort for the Prince of Wales.
But did those close to the future king approve?
It's fair to say that the senior royals, and certainly the important figures in Charles's life, his mother, his father, and the Queen Mother, who Charles was incredibly close to, he always turned to for advice and would certainly have wanted the seal of approval from. They certainly didn't think that she was suitable future royal bride material.
She had a past, and she romanced Andrew Parker Bowles. Parker Bowles had also gone out with Princess Anne.
The heir to the throne nearly always was encouraged to go for a wife who was whiter than white, and it was viewed very much that Camilla did have too much of a colourful past and therefore was too much of a potential embarrassment.
Despite Charles's strong feelings for Camilla, his royal duties took him away from her and overseas.
Charles was in his 20s. He was having to do military service because he's one day going to be commander-in-chief. He then joined the Navy to follow his father, his grandfather, and his two great-grandfathers. And it was very important to him to fulfill that role because that's what's expected of him.
With Charles away leading the military life expected of a future king, Camilla moved on.
Like a lot of young ladies, they don't like their men disappearing out of their lives. He did disappear out of her life, and she married Andrew Parker Bowles.
One can only imagine that Charles must have felt pretty crushed by this news. He'd gone away to serve, hoping that Camilla would wait for him. Certainly he thought that the relationship had legs, even if his family didn't.
By marrying Andrew Parker Bowles, Camilla was ruling herself out of ever having a royal future.
If she'd even entertained the thought of being queen, she would have thought, well, that's it, I'm waving goodbye to that. Because at that point, of course, in the 1970s, there was no way that a divorcee could ever marry a member of the royal family, let alone the heir to the throne.
She remained great friends with Prince Charles. Prince Charles was always around at their house. You know, he's a godfather to their first child. He was almost one of the family.
By the late 70s, eligible bachelor Charles was approaching 30 years old and still without a future queen by his side.
He's getting on a bit, isn't it? About time we got married.
The media scrutiny grew.
He was seen very much as the action man, and a lot of glamorous women sort of came and went. And, you know, the tabloids began to catch on to the fact that this was a bit of a good story.
He couldn't really step out with a member of the opposite sex without the press immediately analysing everything about this person.
Even though he was very much sought after, that in terms of his connection, in terms of that love, his relationship with Camilla never left him.
One of the women Charles dated was Lady Sarah Spencer. An aristocratic family with earls and dukes dating over 500 years and links to Winston Churchill, the Spencer name was an ideal match for a royal prince. Although the relationship with Sarah didn't last, it resulted in Charles meeting her younger sister, Diana.
Shortly after the funeral of Lord Mountbatten, he'd been assassinated, Charles had been very, very upset. And Diana said to Charles, I saw you at that funeral and you looked so terribly sad. And he was very touched by this.
And there was this beautiful young girl showing him attention, and clearly he felt a lot of responsibility too to fulfill what was necessary as the heir to the throne and get married.
Where Camilla had been deemed unsuitable as a future queen, Diana was the perfect fit. And after just 6 months, Charles proposed at Windsor Castle.
He was given more or less an ultimatum by his father to either marry Diana or let her go.
Diana ticked all the boxes. She didn't have any baggage, she hadn't had any relationships really before meeting Prince Charles.
He thought she was the kind of girl he could grow to love.
Despite the shortness of their courtship, the palace, press and the public were enamoured by the royal couple.
Why have you come here today?
To try and get a glimpse of Diana and Charles.
Why are you so pleased?
Because I think she's just the right person for him.
This was an extraordinarily quick whirlwind, but it's what the public wanted. Once they saw Diana, they wanted Diana to be Prince Charles's wife.
You're about to marry the Prince of Wales, and one day you would, in all likelihood, be Queen. It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden, the transition.
It is, but I've had a small run up to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles, I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
Shockingly, they'd only met a dozen times before they married. They didn't know each other at all.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Most of the world thought they were looking at the future King and Queen of Britain. On a hot summer's day, with the eyes of the world upon them, Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer in July 1981. The event was watched by 750 million people worldwide.
This was a thing of fairy tales. She was so young, so beautiful. Here he was, the future king. It seemed to be, from the outside looking in, a marriage made in heaven.
The feeling was electric from one end of the United Kingdom to the other, from north to south, from east to west.
The United Kingdom was granted a national holiday to mark the wedding of the heir to the British throne, who was marrying somebody many thought to be the perfect future queen.
They bought the tea towels, they bought the mugs, they turned up outside St Paul's Cathedral, they lined the streets of the Mall. They gathered outside that famous balcony to watch that iconic royal kiss. When the truth was somewhat different.
Behind closed doors, cracks had begun to appear.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure when anybody marries into the royal family. When you're born into the royal family, you grow up with that pressure. When you marry into the royal family, you marry into pressure.
Diana told me much later in one of our private conversations that she had felt like a lamb to the slaughter as she walked up the aisle, which is very sad, but I think she knew that things weren't quite right. And when she saw Camilla in the congregation, was immediately uneasy about it.
Most were unaware that Charles and Camilla had remained in close contact.
Charles was so close to Camilla that he brought her a bracelet that was engraved with their initials, which Diana found.
She was enraged by it. She knew who it was for, and she wanted to know why he was giving this token to Camilla.
Despite whispers in the press of a rift between the royal couple, within 3 years, Charles and Diana had welcomed 2 sons, William and Harry, into the world. Royal insiders pinpoint this as the moment that Charles and Diana's relationship was starting to break down.
Charles wasn't the fully hands-on dad that she would have expected. And I suppose that created a distance between the two.
She strongly suspected that Charles was still in love with Camilla and hadn't let go of her. Diana felt cut off, she felt isolated, she felt betrayed.
Royal tours gave the press a first-hand look at the cracks in the marriage.
Diana had asked Charles to come with her to the Taj Mahal, the Temple of Love. And he'd refused. And she was really hurt by that. So she made a point of going on her own.
A tour of South Korea in 1992 would prove to be their last overseas engagement as a royal couple.
All attention from the British press was focused on any mutual signs of affection being shown between the prince and the princess.
They went separately and they left separately, and I think the press really jumped on that and they realised that this was going seriously wrong. But nobody apart from Diana and her intimate circle knew about Camilla at that time. That didn't come until later.
Shortly after their return from South Korea, in the year that the Queen dubbed an annus horribilis, Charles and Diana's separation was formally announced by Prime Minister John Major in the House of Commons.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, though saddened, understand and sympathise with the difficulties that have led to this decision.
Charles and Diana were told to continue to carry out royal engagements separately. Diana remained living in Kensington Palace, whilst she also kept her title Princess of Wales.
Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
At that stage, bizarrely, they said it doesn't change anything, that she's still destined to be the Queen, which was a bizarre thing to say when you look back at it now.
Despite them no longer being a couple, divorce wasn't an option for the heir to the throne.
Charles, as the heir to the throne, is the future head of the Church of England. The thought that someone who was going to be head of the Church of England could ever be divorced was complete no-no.
The heartbroken public were unaware of the reasons behind the separation of their future king and his queen.
What do you think of the news today that she's going to live separately from Prince Charles?
She's not. That's the first time I've heard that.
First time I've heard that.
At that point, there were whispers within the palace, within the press, but nobody really had the full story.
But within months of Charles and Diana going their separate ways, leaked phone calls seemed to publicly confirm Camilla's relationship with the future monarch.
Tabloid newspaper had somehow managed to get access to conversations between the future king and his lover, Camilla Parker Bowles, which were at best described as intimate, although I'm sure the Queen probably had other choice words for the conversations that were leaked. This, after all, is the future king, someone the nation needs to look up to have the utmost respect for, and here he is, on tape, speaking to his lover, telling her that he wishes he could be a Tampax.
The revelations proved devastating for Prince Charles, whose press image had been at an all-time high just a decade earlier.
Prince Charles was in Shetland today, doing his best to look as if personal problems were the last thing on his mind, and he avoided all questions about the Camilla-gate tapes.
The Charles-Camilla-gate was catastrophic, and it was the beginning of the public's absolute hatred of Camilla, and his standing plummeted as well. People thought he was ridiculous, they thought he was cruel, they deemed them both to be incredibly cruel to have done this to Diana.
The leaked tapes were the beginning of a public feud between Charles and Diana, later dubbed the War of the Waleses.
Charles and Diana fought each other using friends in the press. This was open warfare.
He admitted that he had been unfaithful, although he said not until his own marriage had irretrievably broken down, both of us having tried. But that was the headline: Charles admits adultery.
To go from a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, such and such member of the royal family has got mistresses on the side or, is having affairs, was quite different to actually hearing from the future monarch, I have been unfaithful to my wife, and my wife is Diana, one of the most popular women on the planet.
He was very upset with the negative press, as anybody would be, and it was very negative. It was very vicious.
The scandal rocked the royal family.
This is not what the monarchy is supposed to be about, and it had become a complete soap opera.
The Camilla affair did huge damage to Prince Charles's standing amongst his people, amongst his subjects, the British public. They felt that he had acted disgracefully towards Diana. They no longer trusted him, and many, many people didn't want him to be the future monarch.
In the midst of the public chaos, Camilla's marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles also came to an end.
Up until that point, Andrew was more than happy to let Charles and Camilla's affair go on, providing it was in private. As soon as it came out into the public and he was presented as this injured party, he couldn't let it go on, and the couple filed for divorce.
The popularity of the future king was at an all-time low with the public, as was Camilla's.
So at this point in the kind of mid-90s, Camilla her reputation was absolutely traduced. She was a marriage wrecker, she was a temptress, she looked like a horse. People would spit at her in the street. Her public reputation that she was a complete evil witch, and she had seduced Prince Charles away from his gorgeous wife.
She was, I think it's fair to say, the most hated woman in Britain at one point.
Charles's relationship with Diana had also sunk to a new low.
Things just got so toxic, and they really were toxic between Charles and Diana. They couldn't even be in the same room as each other. And I think it was having a really bad effect on William and Harry.
The marriage problems of Charles and Diana have cast a shadow over the royal family. Now the Queen has decided to bring the whole issue to a head by advising them to divorce.
There's no doubt at all that as Supreme Governor of the Church of England, the Queen certainly did not welcome the prospect of divorce. But since there was such enmity between the couple, there was absolutely no choice.
The first sight this evening of the piece of legal paper signalling the end of the marriage of the heir to the throne. HRH the Prince of Wales versus HRH the Princess of Wales.
This was unprecedented. Of course, Charles, as a future king, is going to be the head of the Church of England. The Church of England does not condone divorce. So this was damaging for the royal family.
With all these revelations, with all the press speculation and coverage of a bitter divorce between the couple, no one would ever think of Prince Charles as the next king. He was widely considered unfit to be the next monarch of Great Britain.
Charles's position as the future king looked precarious, and his relationship with Camilla was damaging his standing within his own family.
He had been so determined to stick by Camilla, to keep her in his life, that he'd alienated not just the public, but many members of his own family too. The Queen did not want the pair of them to be together. She had said time and time again she wanted the relationship to be over.
To Charles, she was his absolute pillar of strength. You know, she was his rock, and really, she was everything to him.
Charles was determined to continue his relationship with Camilla and one day make her his future queen.
Anyone close to the Prince of Wales, and that included his mother, knew that when it came to Camilla, she was non-negotiable, and Charles made that very clear from the outset. He hadn't gone through everything he'd been through, the public humiliation, the admitting of adultery, not to be with Camilla at the very end of it all.
When Camilla was divorced and Charles was divorced, it kind of opened up the possibility of the two of them getting together, but both of them being very sensible people and grown up, realised that this would not be a walk in the park. They would have to do it very gently to ease Camilla into society.
If Charles was to keep his throne and one day end up with the woman he loved, he would have to improve his public image and regain their respect.
Charles went into damage limitation and firefighting on a level that, frankly, the palace were probably not equipped to do.
Charles employed Mark Bolland, a very seasoned and experienced PR professional, to rehabilitate his and Camilla's image. One of the ways he did that was he absolutely befriended all the newspaper editors, he befriended all the newspaper owners, and he gave those editors stories, favourable stories about Charles, about Camilla.
And he would feed us little bits of information. He would tell us what Camilla was up to, what Charles was up to, what his feelings were about Camilla.
Then Prince Charles and his sons, on their first day together on holiday, appeared, having deliberately and most unusually encouraged the press and television coverage.
Charles's image was slowly being rehabilitated, and the king-in-waiting was beginning to lay the groundwork for the woman who he wanted to one day be his queen. But in 1997, tragedy struck.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident.
I think that Charles was devastated when Diana died. I think he was racked with guilt. I think also he wanted, as the Queen did, to protect William and Harry. But the monarchy tends to work using precedent. There was absolutely no precedent for the outpouring of grief, which was completely unique when Diana died. But there's no question that Charles's attempts to get the public on side with Camilla were obviously set back.
In the face of this national tragedy, it looked like the British public would never accept Camilla as part of the royal family. A year after Diana's death, Charles restarted his campaign to introduce Camilla as the woman who would one day stand beside him. But he was met with strong opposition.
The Queen was quite clear that she was not going to meet Camilla. She didn't want to hear about Camilla, and it was still a name that really wasn't widely spoken in palace corridors.
She, as constitutional monarch, felt she should uphold the standards that she'd adhered to all her life, and should she accept that her divorced son should be with a divorced woman? Should she condone this relationship? Was that what her faith, her religion, she's a very religious woman, would guide her to do?
The Queen may have been having doubts, but on Charles's staff, it was decided that they needed to forge ahead with introducing Camilla to the great British public and bring her out into the open as Charles's partner.
There was an attempt to do it at the wedding of Santa Palmer Tompkinson, and her mum, Patty, was Camilla's best friend. So they were going to try and be together there, but that couldn't happen either because they decided they would upstage the bride and groom, and that wasn't fair.
There had been suggestions that the Prince and Camilla Parker Bowles would take the opportunity to go public with their relationship. But she joined other guests well before him, looking relaxed and in a pastel blue suit and matching hat.
In 1999, the couple were invited to the birthday party of Camilla's sister Annabelle, to be held at the Ritz Hotel in London. It was seen as the right opportunity to give the British public their first glimpse of Charles with his future consort Camilla by his side. It was dubbed Operation Ritz.
I remember being in the newsroom, and it was a cold day in January, and rumours started to knock about that something was going to happen down at the Ritz, and that maybe we were going to get sight of Charles and Camilla together for the first time. Mark Bolan was giving sort of the nod and the wink that actually we ought to get our ladders down there. So I said to the news desk, right, get the ladder down there. Well, there were 200 cameras there, I think.
Charles and Camilla emerged. She was wearing a very neat little black coat, and I remember she had a beautiful choker on at the time. And they stood and they posed for photographs, and those photographs went around the world, and that was the beginning of trying to get the public to like them.
Of course, it's only a picture, but last night's coming out was symbolic. Whatever people think about Camilla and Charles, they're telling the world we're a couple, and you better accept it.
This was a big statement. Camilla was going to have some sort of formal role in the future, because there she was on the arm of Prince Charles, very officially his date for the evening.
This really felt like a turn in the road. Suddenly, Camilla wasn't just Charles's mistress. Now she was his companion.
Now the press had their first picture of them, it was down to the Queen to give the relationship the seal of approval. In 2000, she agreed to attend a birthday party for King Constantine of Greece, to be held at Charles's home, Highgrove. Also on the guest list was Camilla.
It seems Camilla's friendship with King Constantine of Greece, seen here at his daughter's wedding, was crucial to her inclusion on the guest list for his 60th birthday party today. The Queen, it seems, made a very deliberate decision to attend.
In February 2005, 56-year-old Charles and 58-year-old Camilla announced their engagement.
How are you feeling, ma'am?
All right.
Just all right?
I'm just coming down to earth.
Did you get down on one knee to propose?
The future bride wore a ring that belonged to Charles's beloved grandmother, the Queen Mother.
I think Charles had always wanted to make Camilla his bride, his wife. I think he felt that she had endured a lot of really negative criticism over the years, and she'd taken it with great dignity, and all he wanted was to make her his wife, his bride.
This was the first time in history that an heir to the throne would marry a divorcee. The Church of England might have backed the union, but this wedding would have to be very different to all previous royal weddings. Charles and Camilla would need to have a much lower-key ceremony.
Having been divorced already, both Charles and Camilla would have found it difficult to marry within the church, so instead they had a civil service at the Windsor Guildhall.
This would be the first large-scale event with Camilla at the centre of royal life, and Camilla was nervous at the potential public reaction.
She was terrified no one would come. She was terrified she'd be booed. And I remember seeing film footage at the time, about 6 a.m, and there was no one on the streets of Windsor. It was freezing as well, I remember. It was a really, really cold day. She must have been terrified that no one would be there. And, you know, I think as a journalist, I was looking at it and thinking the only reaction to this is going to be national apathy, which is kind of almost as bad as protests. However, by 10:30, the streets were thronging with people.
As the prince and his bride were being driven the short distance from Windsor Castle to the Guildhall this morning, history prepared to record a royal marriage without precedence.
TV cameras filmed the moment when Charles and Camilla arrived at the registry office in Windsor for their historic marriage. The ceremony was attended by William, Harry, Camilla's children, and a few friends. The Queen, as head of the Church of England, did not feel that she could attend, but she did join the couple for a blessing at St George's Chapel afterwards.
The first time the public got to see the Queen really close to Camilla was when Charles and Camilla came out of St George's Chapel after the blessing of their wedding ceremony, and there was a picture that didn't appear to be staged. It seemed very, very natural, but there was Camilla by the Queen's side, Queen looking very happy, very relaxed, and, well, Charles looking like the happiest man on earth, because I think on that day he probably was.
And she looked gorgeous. I mean, she looked fantastic in the outfit with that beautiful dress and the headdress. And I thought that she looked the best, you know, she'd ever looked, really. And I think people really at that time thought, well, why shouldn't these two, who were the picture of happiness, who had this long, long love affair on and off over many years, why shouldn't they find happiness?
Camilla was now officially part of the royal family. The palace announced that she would be called Princess Consort when Charles becomes king. The Queen also gave her a new title.
Following their marriage in 2005, Camilla takes on the title of Duchess of Cornwall, which is actually her secondary title. Legally, she is Princess of Wales. But Camilla knew how fond of Diana the public had been. It wasn't going to wash with them that she would be the next Princess of Wales.
Despite her place in the nation's affections and the approval of the Queen, she still had to convince the hardest judges of all. The rest of the royal family, and in particular, Princes William and Harry.
Camilla's relationship with William and Harry has always been quite tricky. Diana obviously painted Camilla as the marriage wrecker.
For the Prince of Wales, the first proper meeting between his son William and his longtime friend Camilla Parker Bowles was obviously a significant event.
The princes were in their mid-teens when their father's relationship with Camilla became public.
Harry refused to see her to start with. Harry wears his heart on his sleeve. He was in his teenage rebellious phase, smoking dope and kind of getting into trouble.
But with children of her own, Camilla was well placed to tackle the unique challenges of being stepmother to William and Harry.
In the early years after Diana's death, all those boys had was Charles. And we all know Charles was emotionally stunted. So they would have needed a woman to talk to sometimes. And I suspect Camilla was very good at fulfilling that role.
William first spent half an hour with Camilla, it's now emerged, and they've got together again since.
She knows that she's not their mother. She's never tried to step in and be their mother. She has been there to support them when they've needed that support. So what was, in the early stages, a very difficult relationship has grown to become a very close one.
It is amazing how close we've become, you know, I mean, ever since our mother died. She's a wonderful woman, and she's made our father very, very happy, which is the most important thing. William and I love her to bits.
10 years before Camilla married Charles, it was inconceivable that William and Harry would have accepted her into their family. But both princes would themselves bring new people into the royal fold, Kate and Meghan. As a royal outsider herself, Camilla had great empathy for both young women. For Kate in particular, she was on hand with invaluable advice leading up to her wedding with William. Throughout her life with Charles, Camilla has always maintained an upbeat public persona in the face of criticism. It's a quality that has rubbed off on Charles. As he edges closer to the throne, Camilla has transformed the way he engages with the public and approaches his duties.
I think it's very clear when you look at Charles and Camilla over the last 15 years, what a difference she has made to his persona, to his outlook, to his demeanour.
We don't want to alarm.
He's just clearly a much happier person now. He's relaxed a bit.
In 2017, on a trip to Canada, Charles and Camilla visited native communities.
One of the things laid on was this Inuit couple who were throat singing. And it sounded very much like two people having sex. Charles and Camilla were tickled pink by this. They were giggling like a couple of teenagers. And that would never have happened 20 years ago. Charles was a very serious, not a very humorous man. She lights up his life. She understands his moods. She understands how to get him out of those moods. She knows what makes him laugh. He loved that she was fun.
Camilla has played a large part in softening Charles's public image during his long march to the throne. The awkward young man who blushed before the cameras.
How you feel today, both of you? I suppose in love. Whatever in love means.
Had been turned into a confident public figure through the influence of his second wife.
I think that Prince Charles would say that Camilla had been the making of him. I think she would be very modest about it and say absolutely not at all.
But there may be one area of Charles's public activity which Camilla is powerless to change. His now infamous so-called political meddling.
The results of human activity warm even this remote ocean.
He has been outspoken on many issues in the past, and some of which have landed him in hot water.
In 1984, at a prize-giving dinner for the Royal Institute of British Architects, Charles denounced a proposed extension to the National Gallery.
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant phrase.
After so long on the sidelines, Charles is now on the cusp of stepping onto the British throne, with Camilla firmly by his side. But what kind of leadership style will we see under Charles?
I think he's strong enough and positive enough, with Camilla by his side, to make a very positive, good king for our times, whatever kind of times we have.
Because of Brexit, because of divisions within the country, Prince Charles is going to have to heal a divided nation and try to make it a united nation.
As the Queen ages into her 90s, we may see Charles speaking directly to the nation more and more. It has led to speculation that she could hand the throne to him early, effectively abdicating.
Abdication is still quite a dirty word in royal circles. I don't think she will contemplate abdication unless forced to do so by ill health.
The Royal Navy's greatest battleship had been chosen for the voyage to the Cape.
When the Queen famously made her address to the nation in South Africa in her 20s, she swore she would be Queen for the rest of her life.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
The vows that she made on her 21st birthday to serve until she takes her last breath, I think those vows are as true to her now as they were then.
The last time a monarch abdicated was in 1936, when Edward VIII stepped down so he could marry American socialite Wallis Simpson. As a divorcee, the morality of that era made her an unacceptable bride for the king. But 60 years later, Britain was more accommodating of Charles and Camilla, who had both divorced from previous marriages. Abdication may not be palatable to the palace or the public, but further back in royal history is an example of another way that power could be handed over to Charles. In 1811, as George III became incapacitated with mental illness, Parliament invoked the Regency Act, whereby his son could rule in his name as the Prince Regent. The Regency Act remains at the disposal of any reigning monarch.
The Regency Act means that she still retains the title, but the next in line, i.e. Prince Charles, will do all the duties for her.
I don't believe for a moment that there will be a Regency Act invoked unless there is a serious illness that prevents the Queen from carrying out her duties. There are no signs of that.
However it may happen, the rule of Charles III edges ever closer, with Camilla destined to be by the king's side. 20 years ago, it was inconceivable that the British public would have tolerated her in this position. But today, it seems she will be welcomed warmly into the role. But will there be support for her taking the title of Queen, even though Clarence House stated she would be Princess Consort at the time of their engagement? Whether she is called Queen or not, Camilla will be the closest confidant and support for our next king. But who else will be included in Charles's monarchy? There have already been signs that his vision for the institution will see it losing members.
Prince Charles has made it very clear for quite some years that he wants to streamline the monarchy, and he doesn't want too many members of the family to charge the British taxpayer more than they have to. Although this might be a good thing for the taxpayer and a good thing for the way the royal family work, it's not such a good thing for the charities, because you can't stay involved with all these charities with so few people.
With the high-profile departures of Harry and Meghan, followed by Prince Andrew's dramatic exit from official duties, Charles's push for a smaller monarchy is already becoming a reality.
We are now at a point where we are almost on a skeletal royal family. It's gone beyond streamlined. We've got the Queen, we've got the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, we have the Cambridges, and of course, Princess Anne.
Whatever form Charles's inner circle takes, Camilla will be beside him, as she has been for 20 years. Their journey as a couple together has not always been smooth. But it seems for now, destined for a happy ending.
The story, as will be written in the history books, will be a great love story, and it will be not only a king in waiting who had to wait 50 years to get on the throne, but also a prince who had to wait decades and decades to get the woman he'd always been in love with by his side.